All right, well, we are live, Shelley. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maria Dismondy. As you can see on the screen below, I am a former author and I'm also a publisher. The publisher of Cardinal Rule Press. We publish realistic fiction books for children. And we are super excited about this series. We've been doing this fall. Super awesome lineup of authors of all different children's genres. And today we have Shelley Johannes. Right? Johannes?
Johannes.
Johannes, yep.
That's
Shelley
okay.
and I am thrilled because I actually got to meet Shelley in person a few months ago. She is a Michigan author, and she has, look at your Beatrice books are right behind you. She has lovely, lovely books that we're going to talk about today. Super great. But Shelley, let's start from the beginning. You are a writer.
Yes.
Have you always been a writer?
I have. Not professionally. Professionally, it took a long time, but I've always loved writing and I always wanted to be an author. I remember as far back as 5th and 6th grade, I have my original diary. And I found this a couple of years ago and was laughing so hard. I couldn't breathe reading the entries, but I always have used writing as a way to process life. And so all through, like, from 5th grade through probably college, I kept a journal. And I think that I'm always narrating life as my days going by. I've gotten myself into so many embarrassing moments. I'm really klutzy. And I feel like that's how I always cope with all the silly things that I do in life is I'm always narrating it as a comedy in my head. And so that's like the casual way I've been a writer my whole life. And I think I just didn't have the guts to do it sooner. I didn't think that regular people were writers. I didn't think it was a job that you could actually go and do. And instead, every job that I went to, I kind of found a way to write in that field. But it took a long time to realize I was allowed to do this and to make it happen.
So I was going to ask you, when did you become a regular writer? Like, when did you, college, did you do studies for writing? It sounds like you had other, jobs throughout your career.
Yes. So I started out in architecture, and it was a really good fit. It was the practical, creative career to go into. I always wanted to write, and I always wanted to do art, and I couldn't really answer like what job is that in the real world. And so my dad had a degree in engineering and had been in the building business. So architecture was this known quantity that I could still be creative. And so I went to school for architecture and I was a designer for about 10 years and had a lot of fun, but writing was still always in the back of my mind of something that I wanted to get to someday.
So at what point did you say, all right, I think I'm going to write for others and I'm going to actually put it out there and see if this can go and get published? Like, tell us about that journey.
Okay, so that was about 7 or 8 years ago. Once I had my kids, I have 2 boys who are now 9 and 12. But when my oldest was young, we were reading How I Became a Pirate by Melissa Long and David Shannon. And the first sentence is, pirates have green teeth when they have any teeth at all. And I just remember reading that sentence and realizing that children's book authors were writers. And because before that we had been reading like early board books. And so you weren't thinking I wasn't thinking of the writing at the time. And just looking at the art and the words, I realized like, this is the perfect thing. And I had never thought of children's books until that point. And just, it was like a flash realization that was the thing I wanted to do. But I was really afraid that I had kind of missed that window because I hadn't gone to school for it. And I had, other things going on, little kids. And, but from that moment, I started just inhaling children's books from my library, just reading so many of them. At that time, I was thinking picture books. And I started working on them for a while, illustrating for small presses in my area as a way to stay home with my kids. I was doing architectural illustrations, and I was kind of balancing freelance stuff of I was teaching at an architecture college. I was doing architectural illustrations on the side, and then I started doing children's book stuff. And I just kind of like hopped into it when the economy took a dive because it was a way to still have an income and be home. But I wasn't doing the art that I wanted to do, and I didn't have control of what I was producing. And so the more I worked on them, I think it made me know more and more like what I wanted to do myself. And then I had to figure out, how do I get there? And then one day I read this quote by Joss Whedon that says, whatever makes you weird is probably your greatest asset. And I, at first, it's like,
and the klutziness and
yes, all these things, even my creativity, I feel like I thought those were my flaws. Like, I'm a very illogical thinker. I don't think chronologically. I'm very intuitive. And I think I had just always felt like those were flaws. And when I read that, I was thinking, well, because he was talking about when you're creating something specifically, like what makes you weird is your greatest asset. So I started thinking, I've been being the opposite of that. Maybe that's why I haven't found what I'm supposed to make yet, is that I'm not really tapping into who I really am. And strangely, the very next day is when I pictured Beatrice for the first time. And I think it's because I just let myself access that part of my brain that I was just like shutting down before.
Like mindset. Like you went from like creativity is my flaw to creativity and this thinking is actually my strength.
Yes. Yeah. So it was so weird to me that and I think all of it's just like timing when you're ready. And every month I was getting more and more determined that I had to do this. And so I think my brain was just getting more and more ready. My determination was getting stronger. And so it's like just reading that quote at the time when I was getting more determined, I think was just like reading the right thing at the right time. And also I knew I needed an agent to do what I wanted to do. And that was another mental block for me. I had this thing in my head, like I pictured Joey's agent on Friends, which is so silly to me, but I was picturing Estelle and I was really scared. And and so the same day I thought of Beatrice, I went to the bookstore and flipped through one of those manuals that gives you all the agents and publishers that are like that year. And I read the bio for the agent that I now have, Stephen Barr. And I felt like time stood still. Like I read the bio and it just was like quirky, a little bit poetic, a little bit of hyperbole, and it was so different than everyone else's. And I just had this strong feeling like I need to work on the book about this girl, and I need to work with this person. And it still took 2 more years before I even queried him. But the whole time I knew that's who I wanted to work with, which really helped me taking the next step, because for me, who I work with is just as important as what I work on, and sometimes even more so. Like when I was in architecture, I think I learned that lesson because I worked with a friend and it was like the dream experience. He was a mentor and it made me learn like when you're working with the right people, creating things is so fun. It's like a high when you're with the right people. And so just knowing that there was someone out there that I wanted to work with and I knew what I wanted to work on suddenly was like the two things that kind of helped me finally make the jump.
I love how your journey, I look like I'm frozen a little bit here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Yeah, my picture's frozen a little bit, but I love how your journey was so natural because architecture is such a creative industry and you were able to use your creative skills, but you were like, and you were also journaling and you were enjoying that aspect of writing. I love this journey. So there are a lot of children who actually classroom teachers who have been replaying these videos. Can you tell us a little bit about the actual writing process and how did you write? Like, did you have a schedule? Did you wake up early in the morning? Or tell us about how Beatrice came to be.
So when Beatrice began, I always feel like your first book is a weirder journey, perhaps, than the other ones, a more meandering journey. So when I started Beatrice, just a picture book version of it, where I was just working like in the margins of my life. My one son was in preschool, the other son was home, and I had tons of freelance work I was doing, so I didn't have a lot of time, but I just every day, like, or I shouldn't even say every day, I would go in spurts. Like maybe for a month, I might work on it constantly, and then I would wait for a while. Thankfully, I told people about it from the very beginning, like I'm going to do this book. And so people would ask me and that would keep me like from setting it aside. So the first 2 years I was working on it were a really long journey to get to this picture book of only like 350 words. And then once I submitted that to the agent that I was interested in, he wrote me back that same day and said, Yeah, it was crazy. And it still blows my mind. And he's the one who said, I think this should be a chapter book. And I would have never thought of that for myself ever. I was really obsessed with picture books and I loved upper middle grade. And I had never thought of writing upper middle grade that much, but I just loved picture books. But as soon as he said it, especially because I really wanted to work with him, I think I was much more open to anything that he would suggest. But there was a page in the picture book that said, lucky for Beatrice, she did her best thinking upside down, but it wasn't the focus of that first book that I wrote.
Okay.
It was about her breaking into the library, but he pointed to that page. She was upside down in an elevator. And he said, I think that that is a whole series right there. The girl who does her best thinking upside down. And so then I had to learn, how do I write a chapter book? And that was a really long process. I would write a few chapters and send it to him, try to figure out what her story would be. And he would give me feedback on what was working and where I was going awry. Because I was making tons of simple mistakes because I didn't have any background. And lots of, common mistakes probably. But then he would point out what I was doing well. And then I would go back and disappear for another month or so and just write a couple more chapters, totally different, scratching the whole story. And just always coming back. The only thing that didn't change usually was her. Like if you even go back to the original picture book, the character was the same. She was obsessed with her ninja suit and upside down, and there were sock puppets that still, everything about her stayed, but the plot changed over and over and over again. Until we finally had a book. And that process, it was 2 years when I wrote the picture book, and then maybe another year and a half before we sold it to Disney.
Okay. And now with Disney, is it a contract for multiple books, correct?
Yes, it was a 3-book deal, and hopefully we'll get to do more. So far, I'm working on 3 right now, and she's only maybe into the first month of the school year. So hopefully we won't leave her hanging there. But I've had so much fun working on the first 3 that it'd be wonderful to be able to keep hanging out with her and her friends.
And so, third one you're writing now, or is it uncompleted?
No, I'm still writing it. I only know the basic premise. I've written enough words that are equal to the length of the book, but they're just not the right words yet. Like it's probably the right ideas, but it's not there yet. So I have a lot of work to do in the next 2 months to try to figure it out.
For that?
We probably need to firm them up, but I know I think in February I have to have it turned into copy editing, which is a little tight since I don't have it written all the way yet. So this will be the tightest timeline so far. It's interesting. That's the most interesting part of trying to write professionally now that you have a 3-book deal, is having deadlines and not being able to ponder something for 3 months and waiting for the inspiration, like waiting for the answer to come to you. You have to force yourself into that space a little bit sooner, which is still a little bit of a learning curve for me of how to do that.
Yeah, I know as writers, and now I'm being an echo. I'm going to plug my earphones back in. But as writers, we find ways to find our voice and to get that inspiration.
Yeah.
For example, I'll go on a walk and driving the car by myself, I get a lot of inspiration. Do you have anything specific that works for you that you discovered? So,
yeah. Well, one of the places I think of my best ideas is in the shower, in the morning. So when I get out, I always try to, I have my notes app open on my phone and I just type anything that came into my mind. Because that's like that first thing in the morning before you drop the kids off and your mind's a little bit more fresh. So I'll jot a bunch of things down. Then sometimes I'll figure out just the right line of dialogue. Sometimes it's just one sentence, but you realize it's the right words. So I'll just jot those in my phone to come back to later. But for me, when I'm doing the writing part, I usually go to a public place. Usually, I wrote my whole first book at Target, strangely, at my Target Starbucks, because I really like to be in public, and it's like a casual environment. It was even more casual than a regular Starbucks, and the people are really friendly. But I get really distracted at home. But when I'm out in public, it narrows down what I can be distracted by. Like I can't be distracted by things I should be doing in my house. And if I get antsy, there's people to talk to kind of distract myself from getting stuck. So usually that environment with my music really, really loud, I don't get distracted by background noise because I have my music blaring, but I'm in a crowd. It's kind of how I do my best writing. But then, like, there's always those problems
So
you can't.
You
Yeah,
are writing with music.
Yes. And I
So
usually, I know lots of people like silence, and I cannot write in silence. I usually find one song that I'll have on repeat as long as it'll work. Like sometimes I can keep the same song for 3 months straight, just the same song cycling. And then all of a sudden one day it's bugging me. Like I can't stand to hear it one more time. Even I could have heard it thousands of times and it's perfect. Then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sick of this song.
This is the coolest thing I've ever learned in this series. The same song.
Yes, it's so bizarre. And it's usually a really annoying song. Like if I hear it later, I'm like, how could I have listened to that song over and over? Because they're usually somewhat repetitive and they just kind of, they all kind of make my body do this. Like they're kind of like a cycling, it's like about the rhythm. It can't be a song I know already. So I really depend on Spotify, like I do, where it recommends your songs for the week. It creates that little playlist. So usually if I run out of a song, I'll listen to one of those playlists a few times through, and then I'll just be gravitating to a certain song. I'll be like, oh, that's the one, and take that one. And then I could, sometimes they only work for a couple days, sometimes a couple weeks, sometimes 3 months.
This is awesome. And I believe your husband, Bob, is commenting. He said yes.
Oh, he's commenting? Oh, no. Song. I do feel bad for him because the bedroom is over my office. And I used to not listen to headphones when I was working at home. And so he would have to put up with hearing the same rhythm over and over and over and over.
But Bob, she's working with Disney, so we need to give her a break. Like she's
he was a trooper, but he would be happy if I switched songs or remembered headphones.
And Debbie Gonzalez, you know Debbie?
Yeah.
Here in Michigan, she is also shocked that you're writing with loud music.
I'm always shocked when people say that they are in the library and they're annoyed people are talking, because I'm like, how can you write in silence? I can't imagine.
So I apologize, I'm getting an echo, but my assistant said people aren't getting it. So I'm going to keep going. I have another question for you. So if you have this 3-book deal, have you started getting ideas for other books as you're writing for the series?
Yes, I'm kind of in that spot right now. Well, I have a picture book deal that that happened in the spring, so I'm finally getting to work on picture books, which is so exciting because that was my first love. And that actually, the idea for that picture book started before Beatrice existed at all. It started with something that my son said when he was in first grade that I knew had to be a book, but I wasn't sure of the how or the when. And so a lot of pieces had to come into place till I was ready to write that one, but I'm really excited to work on that. But the day that I got the book deal with Disney, I said something to my agent, which I don't want to give away because I have not written this book yet, but he said, well, that's your next book. It was just like something that like must be really meaningful and part of who I am that I said. And so as soon as he said that, then all of a sudden I could picture this story in my head almost instantaneously. But I didn't know, would it just fizzle out in my mind, because that was already several years ago. But I just read this book by Linda Urban, A Crooked Kind of Perfect. It's from 2007. And I just found it at a secondhand bookstore the other day. And I had seen people recommending it for years. And it just was calling to me. And I read it in one day and has these short chapters. And everyone kind of just makes your stomach flip because it's just like perfectly emotionally timed. And it made me remember how much I love Rebecca Stead, her book, When You Reach Me. And I love her short chapters in that one. And I was like, oh, this is how I want to write that other book. And it made me wish that I had some free time right now to like put some time in. But I really love that feeling of having this special book that doesn't belong to anybody else yet. And it's just like your secret project. And it can be the reward when you finish other things. You get a little window of time. So I feel kind of excited that that I have that motivation all of a sudden to look for those pockets of time that I could maybe start thinking about this other thing. I think it's always good to have another thing going in your brain.
That's awesome. And I'm struggling today. My little guy didn't have school, but he was supposed to. And he's very quietly playing with trucks back there. But I'm starting to hear.
You're hearing it?
Yeah. I apologize for the background noise.
I can't hear it at all.
Oh, good. This has been a fantastic interview. And I would just like to end today with you sharing a little bit more, because didn't the second Beatrice book just come out?
Yes, it just came out on September 18th. So I just had a book tour, and yeah, I'm super excited. It feels still weird that people are reading it. I loved writing it. It was harder to write than the first one because you have expectations in your head, and writing a second book, you have to reestablish who everybody is, and you're having to do like double duty, almost like recapping naturally, but also telling the next story. So I had a lot more stress writing this one, but then I ended up loving it just as much. And so it's been really fun to share it this last couple of weeks, and to meet kids who've already read it is the weirdest feeling. It's always.
And we actually own the first book. Can you open and show a couple of pieces? Because
sure.
Or either of them. I just think they're really well done.
One. So the premise is that it's about a third grade girl who does her best thinking upside down. And she's the middle child in a family that's way more of a right side up thinking family. And she has a very strict teacher.
See, I love the artwork and the colors that are like mixed in with the book.
Thank you. That was one of my favorite things about working on the book is when my editor, Rotem, suggested adding a color. I had never considered that. And it made it so fun to go from rough artwork, which wasn't in color, to not just feel like you're regurgitating the same drawings. It was like a fun challenge to figure out, how am I going to use this color in the best possible way? So it made that more of a challenge. And anytime you're stretching yourself, I think you're having so much more fun, and that shows up in the artwork. But
yeah, and you don't see that color wash a lot.
Yeah, so I had so much fun doing
and you
it.
Did all the work.
Yes, and the artwork's the relaxing part. Like I always say, writing is all these highs and lows. Like the lows of writing are so low, but the highs are higher than anything when you get it figured out. Where artwork to me is just like this even, relaxing event. So it's fun to kind of have both of those things going on simultaneously. And another thing I like about the artwork is that I do it all on tracing paper. What's fun to me about it is that I spent a lot of time feeling annoyed with myself for taking so long to get to writing and art. And I was annoyed with myself for choosing architecture and taking so long. But I feel like more and more I'm learning that you're like not to begrudge the journey that you took, because you can't end up where you were without that journey. And so just the fact that like I draw on this tracing paper for
Which
my
is
that's what I did in architecture. Yeah. And I use my architecture markers, and I use my favorite felt tip pens still. And I feel like it's just another extension of the journey. So that made me excited to get with that, because I imagined that my rough artwork would be on tracing paper, and that the final would be on water. Go ahead and just, and it just almost seemed for me an easy material to work with, because it's so forgiving, because you can just put another layer on top, and you're not giving up what you already worked on. You're just putting another layer and another layer, and it keeps you loose. And when you use an architecture marker on tracing paper, it pools like it's watercolor, but it's not. And so it's so fun to work with, and I just never imagined that I get to work with it doing children's books. And so I love seeing the connectivity of the whole journey.
That's awesome. We are actually working with an architect now, and he will bring out the papers, the tracing paper, and I'm always in awe. And he did everything by hand, and then they transfer it to the computer, and it's just neat to see that process.
Yeah, that's cool to me, to know that people are still doing that. And
they are. He's a little bit older, but Debbie just commented that your artistic process is fascinating, and it really is. So I want to thank you for coming out today and for being patient with my technical difficulties.
No, it's been fun. Thanks for having me on.
Power through them, like my picture popped in and out, and look, we're running out of time. You see that one?
Yes.
Okay. We are so thankful to have you here and to share this journey with us. So, buddy, But Shelley, I want to wish you the best of luck and to continue writing because what you're doing is fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in real life soon.
Soon, yes, I have actually something coming up. So we'll see you soon. Bye,
Awesome. Bye.